Hey everyone, it's Peter Kerr from Daydream Nation and Reed Little's back to the channel. How are you, my friend?
Doing great, Peter. Doing great. How are you?
Going well, going well. We are going to do a Kiss countdown, our 10 favorite albums, 10 to 1. So what we're going to do is we're going to do it in order. We take it in turns, all eras. Take it away, Reed. What is your number 10 pick?
Okay. First off, thank you very much for inviting me to do this. I had a lot of fun revisiting my Kiss collection. Anytime you hear a K sound during the show, just imagine it's a K. So I just wanted to lay this out. My criteria for choosing albums for this show was extremely simple. I only had two. Nothing fancy. I'm a guitar player. I'm a music commentator. I've spent the last couple of years analyzing albums. I could have gone into depths. I could have talked about riffs and master volume Marshalls versus non-master volume Marshalls and when Paul Stanley went to EMG pickups and this and that and the other. I had two criteria, just two. One was whether I actually own the album on CD. Because there's a couple albums that I think that maybe I like, but if I never actually bothered to buy it on CD, I probably didn't like it that much, right? And the other one, plain and simple, how happy did it make me listening to it? That's it. I put on the album, I put on a next album and went, does this album make me happier than the album I just listened to? And I just shuffled them like that and went through the whole catalog that way. And this is how it shook out. So I've kind of told this story, and I'm sorry, I'm just going to set this up a little bit. My very first Kiss experience, now that's with the band. The other one's nobody's damn business. My very first Kiss experience was in 1977. I had a friend who had the 45 of Christine 16 and Shock Me. This came out just before the album Love Gun hit stores. So I know exactly when I first heard Kiss. It's so weird. They're one of the very few bands that I can identify with that exactitude when I first heard them. So it was just before Love Gun came out. And that means that I heard Love Gun actually was the first full album I heard, and then Rock and Roll Over and every kind of backwards from there. And that meant I heard Alive before I heard Dressed to Kill, Hotter Than Hell, and Kiss. And I like Alive so much better than those first three albums that I couldn't listen to those first three albums for years and years and years. And it wasn't until they did the CD reissues that I could stand to listen to them at all. The live versions were so much superior. But now I can finally listen to them and get some enjoyment out of them. So I'm starting with my number 10 actually as Dressed to Kill. This cover has always made me smile. This is back when Gene still looked like he enjoyed being in the band. I mean, look at this photo. He looks like he's having fun. This album has some good deep cuts. Now, I think all of the first three albums, the best songs ended up on Alive. They had been touring these albums relentlessly. They had road tested them. They knew what the best songs were. Those songs all ended up on Alive. But this album has some pretty good deep cuts. Ladies in Waiting, Ladies Room, Two-Timer. My favorite track on this album is She, which is a song I always like. I do like the version on Alive better, but I like the version that's on the CD. It makes me happy, but it makes me happy to the extent of being my number 10 album.
Nice. And Gene has a nice pair of white clogs, footwear on that cover. Just maybe just show it a little bit closer for the...
I do wish they'd gone with this negative image that's the rear album cover. I think that's cooler than the front image.
I think that might have been a bit scary. Let's see, nice pair of white... Look at his clogs. Yeah, he's looking like he's having a little fun.
That's a cool image.
Yeah, it is. It is. All right. Well, my number 10 is in a similar era. And I played this over the last week or so just to confirm my choice. And I'm going to go with Hotter Than Hell from 1974. Now, I love the songs on this album. Parasite, Going Blind, Hotter Than Hell, Strange Ways. The thing that you've got to kind of forgive is it sounds terrible. The production is kind of non-existent. It sounds, Reed, like they recorded it off a cassette player, a portable cassette player. But that aside, the songs are there. And I'm a big fan of those early couple of albums. You know, a lot of these songs are just staples of their live show right to this day. I would describe it's some of it is very kind of bluesy. It's got a Rolling Stones feel. You can see that they're kind of figuring out where they want it to be, but I just think it brings a lot of enjoyment to me in listening to these songs. I think side 2 is a little bit underrated. It doesn't get a lot of the kudos. It's top heavy on side 1 in regards to some of their more well-known songs, like All the Way, Mainline, Coming Home, probably don't get as much recognition as some of the other tracks off this album. But anyway, this is my number 10. Production aside, which you've got to forgive, I'm a big fan of Hotter Than Hell. And I love the album cover, you know, the Japanese, and, you know, they had this incredible party. They got a little bit drunk, and there's all these different sort of shots with various fans or various people on the back of the album. And it's kind of a crazy sort of kaleidoscope of Oriental culture meets Kiss. Yeah, look, it's kind of their figuring out album, but I like it a lot. Over to you.
We'll be seeing that one again later. So now this one might surprise people to see it so low in the list, but my number 9 is going to be Revenge. So this is kind of an unusual album for me in that as you'll see later, I love 80s Kiss. This album gets a lot of praise to the point where I think it gets way more praise than it really deserves from people, that as if people talk like Crazy Nights and Hot in the Shade were terrible albums and this was somehow riding the ship. I actually like Crazy Nights and Hot in the Shade. I saw the Hot in the Shade tour. I thought it was great. There are a lot of good songs on both of those albums. I'll give it this, though. This is, from my ears, the hands down best sounding album that Kiss ever released. I wish they could go back in time and apply the sonics of this album to every other 80s album they put out, because it just sounds that good. The guitars sound amazing. The bass sounds amazing. The drums sound amazing. I mean, don't touch the music, but just the equalization, the amplifiers, just it would sound so awesome. Now that said, I think there's an interesting role reversal on this album. I think Paul's songs on Revenge are very juvenile, and I think Gene's songs are very serious, a little mean-spirited, but very serious. I think the opener, Unholy, is my favorite track on the album. Some of his songs, let's see here, like Spit and Domino, I think they're a little mean-spirited. I was really surprised to find out that I've met a lot of girls of a certain size that really love those albums or really love those tracks, and they're like, oh, that song's about me. And, okay, fine. Whatever, I guess. People love what they love. It reminds me, I saw Buck Cherry open for Kiss one time, and I remember that there was this group of women sitting in front of me in the audience, and Buck Cherry went into their song Crazy Bitch, and I remember this woman in front of me in the audience turned to her girlfriend and went, oh, it's my theme song! And I went, have you listened to the lyrics in this song? Are you sure you want this song to be associated with you? Okay. You know, cool, whatever. It's not my place to judge, right? But anyway, it's a good album. I didn't think it was a fantastic album. I like it, but the thing is, I thought that there was a lot better music coming out at the time. That was the problem with it. Not that it wasn't in and of itself a fantastic album, but I thought that they were being lapped at that point by a lot of other bands. You know, and that just kind of continued on into the 90s. So still good enough to be my number 9, Revenge.
Maybe more about that later. All right. Now, this next album, I kind of avoided for a considerable period of time. For some reason, in the 80s, I just never listened to it. I heard a couple of tracks here and there. I was actually in a garage band and played one of the songs in the band. But the album per se, never bought it. And it wasn't only until a couple of years ago where I had to study this album as part of a show that I actually did with you, Mr. Reed Little, the Contrarians. And I'm talking about Kiss Asylum. This is a really, really good album. And I think it's their finest hair metal period album. The production is sparkly. It was Paul Stanley and Gene Simmons both taking on the co-producer role, but the songwriting is, especially on the Paul Stanley side of the fence, is really, really strong. King of the Mountain, what a cracker of an opening track. Who Wants to Be Lonely? Love that. Love's a Deadly Weapon, Tears Are Falling. Look, there are some weaknesses on the album. Some of Gene's songwriting, well, a lot of wags may say in the 80s that Gene's songwriting wasn't, below par, because in between reading a script for Wanted Dead or Alive or whatever Hollywood movies he was doing, I don't think he had little time to think through, figure out lyrics and let alone write songs. But I don't mind the Gene songs. It's got a bit of a Keith Richards, at its very basest level. I think, probably the weakest song on this album is All Night, incidentally, which was the song that I sang in a garage band. But it's just a fun album. It's glammy, it's hair metal, and let's face it, it just celebrated everything that was about hair metal in 1985. So it's just big, broad, dumb fun, and it's louder than life. You look at the cover, which is a little bit of a sequel to Dynasty, and, if this was in the category of album covers that actually look how they sound, this would be the one. So Kiss Asylum is my number 9, and Mr. Reed Little, I suspect I may hear about this in the next hour or so with you. Let's see.
I think it'll be a while before we get around to that one, but yes. Now, our next one, I think we're up to 8. So I make no apologies for including this on my list. My number 8 album is the aforementioned Dynasty, or as people across the pond insist on referring to it, Dynasty. I love this album. I think this album has some fantastic songs. I think now it is clearly the album where the wheels start coming off the cohesiveness of Kiss. It's the album that was produced after the solo albums. They are no longer writing as a band. They are submitting songs as individual members. You can tell this is a Gene song, this is a Paul song, this is an Ace song, but they at least still care. And I think this is the last album where the 4 of them still more or less care about putting out a good product. They produced a fantastic tour. The tour was I got to see that tour in 1979. It was a wonderful experience. It was over the top. It was everything you might possibly want. Or if you fantasized about Kiss in concert, this was what they were really like in concert. You know, it was colorful and just fire bombs going off, and the drum riser with the cats under it, and Ace shooting fireworks out of his guitar, and oh, it was just glorious. And the songs are catchy, and I know anybody who has watched me badmouth Ace over and over again, well, here's your vindication. My favorite song on this album is 2000 Man, which is not only an Ace song, but a cover of a Rolling Stones song. And by the way, I hate the Rolling Stones original. I think it's crap, but the Kiss cover of it is great. It's simple and catchy, and Ace nails it, and it's just fun, and I love it, and it makes me happy. And I played that song probably 5 times for every other song on this album.
Okay, thank you. I'm just writing a letter to Keith Richards and just transcribing what you just said about the 2000 Man. Right.
Don't tell Bicycle Legs. He has enough problems already.
Hi, Bicycle Legs, if you're watching. Okay, the next album that I'm going to pick is Kiss Lick It Up. Kiss Lick It Up, the first album that they took the face paint off. You actually got to see Kiss. I actually remember seeing the album in a glass case in a Time Zone. Time Zone was like an arcade sort of shop where they had all video games, and they were doing a big promotion with Kiss. And I studied it, and you could sort of recognize who was Paul, who was Gene. Wasn't really familiar with Vinnie Vincent and Eric Carr, but I must have poured looking over the album cover, even at the record store, just to, fascinated that this is what Kiss looked like without their makeup. Is this the album they needed to make to resurrect Kiss, or was it Creatures of the Night? I guess that's open for debate. But one thing's for sure, the songwriting on this album is outstandingly strong. And I will defend to the death that I think Vinnie Vincent was definitely a big reason for the resurrection of Kiss. Vinnie Vincent's got game. Vinnie Vincent was, for all his failings, and, it's a bit of a soap opera. It's very National Enquirer. But in that particular period of time, he had good, fantastic game as a songwriter. His guitar playing on this album is controlled, comparative to Vinnie Vincent Invasion and all the shredding. Obviously, Gene and Paul sent him very strict parameters, and it services the material wonderfully. I mean, 1,000,000 to 1, that is a magnificent song. All Hell's Breaking Loose, Exciter, Lick It Up, Young and Wasted. The songwriting on this album is strong, and basically it was a bit of a career resurrection for them. It charted higher than Creatures of the Night, and I don't think you can deny that Vinnie Vincent was a big part of that, bringing his songwriting chops. I think this band was very, very focused. It's part of the story. So Lick It Up is my next choice in the top 10.
Okay. Well, moving right along, I'm heading back to, well, actually not back to the 70s because I haven't left the 70s yet. So where am I at? I'm at number 7 now. So back to my very first Kiss album, we're going with Love Gun. So Love Gun is kind of funny because my parents were absolutely outraged, of course, that I had developed a liking for this band because they understood, what the lyrics of Kiss were about. I was 9 years old. I did not understand just how many songs on this album were about Gene's penis. Now, I think that was kind of a ballsy move on his part, so to speak.
Penis, ballsy, all in one sentence, folks.
It was, I even had, I don't know if when you got the album, it came with a love gun. it was this little cardboard gun that had this wax paper thing that you flipped it out and the wax paper would come out and go pop. It was the craziest thing. But you know what? Again, this album just made me happy. And it even the doo-wop song it had And Then She Kissed Me, and I know that hard rock fans really had a problem with that. I was 9 years old. You know what? I didn't care if they were hard rock and metal. I just liked a good song. And that song was a good song. And in the 70s, Kiss, let's face it, Kiss loved Detroit. They loved Motown. They loved that late 50s, early 60s sound. You could definitely hear it in Peter Criss's solo music. And they could still do it and do it as hard rock. And Love Gun has some really great songs on it. It's not my favorite album from the Alive 2 cycle. We're going to get to that much later. But it's a solid album. This album cover is a little questionable with the women worshiping at their feet, you know, and the superhero Kiss thing. It's it's a little over the top. But again, I was 9 years old. I wasn't really, all that kind of stuff went over my head. If I had been 13, maybe I'd have picked up on that kind of stuff. But all I knew was I liked the songs on it. I liked the music. I didn't notice how creepy Christine 16 was. I didn't know Shock Me was about S&M. I just knew I liked the album, and I still like it. It still makes me happy. It's a good album. My favorite song on it is Love Gun.
Yeah, well, that song gets played on American Idol. Anyway, when Kiss were playing it, it sort of lives on that song. All right, I'm going to go to an album that absolutely flopped all around the world, except for Australia and maybe New Zealand. Oh, I should research that. But this album went to #1, and I am talking about Kiss and their Unmasked album of 1980. So this was the lineup where Peter Criss had left the band, and Eric Carr was, Peter Criss was credited on the cover, but he actually did not play. I'll do a correction on that. It was actually Anton Fig that played the drums, didn't he, Reed?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So Paul Stanley, Gene Simmons, Ace Frehley, Peter Criss, but you had Eric Carr. He was part of the tour of this. This album is power pop. It's pop. It very much is absorbing what's on radio at that particular time. And, there was a little bit of a renaissance of garage rock and power pop. You had bands like The Knack. You had Cheap Trick. They were on area. You even had a little bit of yacht rock, bands like Christopher Cross Toto. That sort of I wouldn't say easy listening, but very melodic rock with a little bit of crunch. And they were definitely following that path with this album. I like it. I just think the songwriting is really strong, even though it's not the Kiss of 1973, 74, 75. That is long gone. So basically, you've got some outside writers coming in, like Bob Kulak. You've got Vinnie Poncia. He does a whole stack of songs. I love Is That You? Shandy. When Kiss come and play Australia, they never fail to play Shandy, which was a top 10 hit. And it's kind of, I joke, it's like a national anthem down here. Talk to Me has got a lot of sass. I love the Ace songs on this album. He's really showing his personality. And, I think when he did his solo album onwards, he built up confidence that, hey, I'm a big personality in this band and I can do some songs too. So I love the Ace songs on this album. She's So European, Torpedo Girl, You're All That I Want, You're All That I Need. I love this album, but it gets slammed because it is not the hard rock version of Kiss that, a lot of the people remember or love. I guess that I've got an attachment to this album because it's like an entry point. It was a huge seller in Australia. I can't say that enough. Anyway, Unmasked, that is my pick. And it's just one of those albums. Just think of it as a Kiss power pop album, and put your headphones on and listen it to in that sort of sense, and you'll enjoy it. Anyway. All right, over to you, Reed. What's your next one?
Okay, I'm actually going back even further. Now, this is an album that surprised me that it floated up this high. I'm going all the way back to Hotter Than Hell for my number 6. So this is an album that I literally could not listen to until they did the CD reissue. I think this is the 2012 reissue. I'm not entirely certain. They may have done it earlier than that, and I just didn't buy it until 2012. I didn't research it that. I know I didn't buy it until 2012, but I don't know when they did the reissue. But it sounded so bad when it came out. I mean, as far as I was concerned, it was unlistenable. When I was a kid, I did not have a great stereo system, right? I had a cheap stereo system. So when you have a terrible sounding album and you put it on a terrible stereo system, the experience is just unlistenable. So I loved the songs, but I just listened to the versions on live, and I was like, no, pass, hard pass. So years and years and years later, when I was like, they did a reissue, I'll get it just to have it. And then I was listening to it and went, wow, they've cleaned it up so much. They've improved it so much. You can actually listen to it. It sounds good. And some of these songs are really good. Now, okay, so the songs just sound so much better. They're short and punchy. Like you said earlier, they're still trying to figure things out, but they know not to overstay their welcome. The songs are less than 3.5 minutes long. They still include some of that kind of good time 50s rock and roll kind of feel. But my favorite track on it is Watching You, which is a song that made it onto Alive. But it's interesting. I did notice, even though Paul is my favorite member of Kiss, I like Paul's voice, I like rhythm guitar. But as I went through these albums, many times it was the songs that Gene sang that were my favorite songs. Although in these early albums, they did trade off vocals a lot. And I think Watching You is Gene and Peter. Anyway, it's a short, fun album that I overlooked for years. So it's almost like discovering a new album.
Production values aside, is that concerns you when you listen to it? Because it is really cruddy production, isn't it?
Well, it's so much better though. I'm telling you, the reissue, it just sounds okay now. Yeah. I mean, it doesn't sound like Revenge, but it's very listenable.
Yeah. All right. Thanks for that, Reed. The next pick I am going to put a spotlight on is Revenge, which a lot of critics say is always rated as a bit of a top-tier Kiss album. So this came out while grunge alternative rock was at the fore, and I kind of think that it is a little bit of a return to form. The preceding album was Hot in the Shade, which I don't mind, but my big complaint about Hot in the Shade was it was just way too many songs. It was self-produced. It needed a better producer. In this album, Vinnie Vincent is brought back into the Kiss family, albeit temporarily, as a songwriter, and he co-writes some of the best Kiss songs in 5, 6, 7 years. Unholy is a cracker of a track, and it leads off Gene Simmons leading off on the track 1 on the album. I think Unholy was very much a song that sort of suited the times. It had that really down-tuned, grungy, dark feel to it. And I think Gene is best when he's not thinking about the lower loin regions, but where he's doing the God of Thunder. He's doing he's got that sort of character, the demon character. I just think that's one of Gene's best songs ever, co-written with Vinnie Vincent. Domino, That's another great Gene Simmons song. Heart of Chrome, Paralyzed. Stanley does all the sort of typical Paul Stanley songs where are kind of a little bit sleazy. I mean, I'm not a big fan of Take It Off, which was a co-write of Bob Ezrin and Kane Roberts. I think the reason why I like this album so much is I think the Gene moments shine. And when he was like in the 80s, artistically was in a bit of a wasteland. It's like he's just sort of woken up. He's taken control and written some of the best songs on this album. I even like God Gave Rock and Roll to You Too. I know it's a Russ Ballard song. A lot of people think it's a bit of a throwaway, but I never cease to get a little bit sentimental when I see the film clip and I see Eric Carr. Like Eric Carr was very, very sick, and he literally got out of his bed, hospital bed, or I don't know the full story, but it was a real struggle. He got sat on the stool in that video clipped and apparently just got into it. And I just feel very sad when I see that song and just see the late, great Eric Carr just playing. I've got to say something. I think Eric Carr is my favourite drummer in Kiss, the Kiss story. Was so much, added so much personality and heart to the band during the 80s. A lot of people say it's a cheeseball song, but I always think of that film clip. It kind of makes me a little bit sad. Anyway, enough of that. Revenge. I think this may be the last decent Kiss album. I don't think there's any after this that I would really sort of put a spotlight on. Anyway, over to you. What's your next pick?
Okay, moving into the top 5. So, my next one, we're moving up to Animalize. So, I know Mark St. John's playing was divisive, and I get that. This was a period of struggle in the 80s for Kiss. They went, from Creatures of the Night, it looked like Ace was still in the band, even though he wasn't. Then you had Vinnie Vincent in the band for an album, then he was gone. Then you had Mark St. John in the band for an album, then he was gone. Then Bruce Kulick comes in. Luckily, Bruce is in for 10 years. So, things were not good in the Kiss camp, but they needed a shredder, despite Paul constantly talking about how he was trying to get Mark St. John to play more like Paul Kossoff from Free, which I'm like, that is just such a stupid comment. I mean, they playing like it was the early 70s, in the early 80s was a good way to get your band sent right off to the unemployment line. Bands pretending it was the early 70s were not selling albums in the 80s. If you were going to compete in the hair metal space, you needed a shredder. That was just the way it was. They didn't have to compete in the hair metal space. They chose to do that. They needed a shredder. St. John fit that bill. Now, whether you like the solos you committed to tape, that's another matter entirely. But I think there's some really strong songs on this album. In fact, this is their most aggressive of the hair metal albums. It's very strongly produced. It's very aggressively recorded. And weirdly, I think I've mentioned this story before, but this was the album that people in my high school liked. And it's a weird little bit of culture that in my high school, people liked one album from a band and then they moved on. That was it. Like, people got Duran Duran's Rio and then they moved on. They got Bryan Adams' Reckless and then they moved on. They got Kiss Animalize and then they moved on. And everybody thought I was weird for knowing the name of the album that came before and after this, right? I was there were no serial music fans. People did not follow bands. They just got whatever the currently popular album was, and only one. So, they got Motley Crue's Theater of Pain. Nobody was a Motley Crue fan. They were a Theater of Pain fan. Well, I enjoy this album. My favorite song on it is probably the intro. I've Had Enough, Into the Fire. it really sets the tone. Like I said, it's very aggressive. Even after Lick It Up, which was Lick It Up, still a very poppy album, and then Into the Fire comes on. You're like, whoa, this is a pretty heavy album. It was heavier than your Rats and your Dawkins and your Motley Crues, and I thought it really made a statement, and that was very interesting. And it sold pretty well, which was good because Kiss needed that to keep them going in the 80s. And again, it makes me happy to the tune of being my number 5.
Okay, a few things to unpack here. Log in the Fireplace. You want to talk about that?
I don't mind it.
Come on.
It was. I don't.
That's not Shakespeare, is it?
No, but stupid lyrics were just part and parcel of what was going on in Los Angeles. Now, again, it's not like Motley Crue and Rat and Dawkins were writing poetry. Everybody was writing, it's like you listen to Poison and Baby Talk Dirty to Me with some kind of inspirational lyric. People were just writing crap about sex. So,
but Burn Bitch Burn is a little bit bottom feeder. Bottom.
Yeah, I mean, I said Gene was not writing good lyrics at the time. The music of that song, I think, is quite good. His lyrics, I don't think, are particularly good.
Yeah, that might be another challenge for us. Just wipe the lyrics and put our own lyrics and try to turn it into a different song. I'm kind of a little bit there's two things in the Kiss story I'm obsessed about. I'm obsessed about Vinnie Vincent, and everyone knows about that. But I'm also obsessed about Mark St. John because he was like there for a nanosecond. And apparently he only did 3 performances with Kiss. And one of those performances was like a half and half, where he did half a show and Bruce Kulick did half a show. He had some sort of a medical issue that he couldn't play, and Bruce Kulick, sort of took over for the tour. And when it got to the crunch, where technically Mark St. John had recovered, they were more convinced that Bruce Kulick would have been a good fit for the band, and it was sort of bye-bye Mark. So Bruce had done a kind of a long... his tour was like he was basically auditioning for the role. But I purchased last year Kiss Off the Soundboard, which is one of the few performances of Mark St. John at Poughkeepsie, New York. And he's really not bad at all, Mark St. John. So if you think of his playing on that album where he plays like a bumblebee and it's all very shreddy, but this, he's kind of got tasteful licks. He plays within the role of those early 70s songs. He doesn't overplay his hand. And it's not bad at all. It's an interesting look.
Have you ever heard his band White Tiger?
I've heard some tracks, yeah.
I never have.
Yeah. Another element to this is that I've heard stories that his ego did get out of control. So I've seen a lot of sort of interviews with various folk, and he didn't even like Kiss. So there's an interview that he did in a Kiss convention, and he's on record to say that I didn't even like their music. So, which is a sort of interesting sort of perspective. But he was there just for a nanosecond. Fascinating story, and then he was gone. So anyway, and Bruce Kulick became part of the family for a considerable period of time.
The Mitch.
All right.
Love Bruce Kulick.
I know you do. More about that. I am going to go with my number 5, which is Destroyer. So this is another divisive album read because a lot of folk don't like, a lot of the traditional old diehard Kiss fans don't like it because of it's got the Bob Ezrin bells and whistles. You've got children's choirs, you've got that orchestral sound. So basically what he's taken is I wouldn't call Kiss a garage band, but a band with a very basic meat and potato sound, and he's embellishing it into something that's quite grand. It's like, how would I relate it? Like turning a band into something that's widescreen. Lawrence of Arabia, huge. A lot of people didn't like that. I love it. I don't mind it. I think it's a really interesting part of the Kiss history. And, you know, some of the songs off this album are just Kiss classics. They're played in the song set right to the last concert. Detroit Rock City, what a cracker of an opening track. A lot of people say Rock and Roll All Night is the song that sums up the ethos of Kiss. I think Detroit Rock City, if I had to be held at gunpoint and said, what's the song that sums up Kiss? I'd say Detroit Rock City. God of Thunder, song written by Paul Stanley, perfect for Gene Simmons. It's the Gene song. I love that song. Shout It Out Loud, another great rousing anthem. I mean, hell, I play Guitar Hero, the video game, and I love playing out Shout It Out Loud. Anyway, that's a little bit of trivia. Beth, that's a real interesting story. You know, it's kind of the accidental hit. DJs were flipping over the single. They put on Beth and it became a hit and, you know, probably kick-started a whole little sort of pathway for Peter Criss for a little while. Do You Love Me? Look, it's got bells and whistles. It's got that big concept sound. It's very 70s. I love it. You know, I've got nothing much more to say. Not only you're getting the Kiss experience, but you're getting the Bob Ezrin experience, and I don't mind it at all.
All right.
All right. Over to you. What's your next one?
Okay. So we're before I bring out my number 4, I want to talk about an alternative history. Well, actually, my number 4 is Creatures of the Night. The album that really, I know that technically Unmasked is their first album in the 80s. But to me, Creatures of the Night is kind of thematically the album that really starts their career in the 80s. At least in the US. But I think it's actually a bit of a misstep. Now, many Kiss fans of our vintage will tell you that this was the album that righted the ship, that Unmasked was a terrible mistake, that The Elder was a terrible mistake, and that Creatures of the Night righted the ship. And I'm like, I don't, even though I'm putting this at number 4 and I love this album, it makes me happy. But I don't know that that's really a narrative that I buy into, because Kiss had 2 paths that they could have followed. Now, we're talking about the transition from the 70s to the 80s. 70s bands were struggling to make the transition from the 70s to the 80s, right? A lot of 70s bands were dying going into the 80s. Look at their peers. Aerosmith was the biggest rock band in the 70s. They were dead in the 80s. They were dead.
In the US, that is.
They were alive somewhere else?
No, I'm saying biggest band in the 70s, you couldn't get arrested in Australia, UK, Europe.
Yeah.
That's like an American thing.
Right. Understood. Yes, definitely. But their career was over. It took Run DMC covering one of their songs to bring them back to life. And then they went pop. And it was as a pop band that they became huge again. So Kiss became a heavy metal band with Creatures of the Night. Now, Creatures of the Night is a hybrid 70s, 80s album. Now, this is the band that Paul Stanley would tell you over and over and over again, this is the best album we did in the 80s. And to me, I think it's because Paul never gave up his life's ambition of being Led Zeppelin. That's all Paul ever wanted to do, was be the next Led Zeppelin. And this album is still very, very much, this is as close as I know this is going to piss off Led Zeppelin fans, but this is as close as Kiss ever got to Led Zeppelin. The songs are slower, they're heavier, There's not a lot of real like high-speed burners like you would get with Lick It Up and Animalize and Asylum. The tempos for the rest of the 80s would increase. This is a very mid-tempo album. Just listen to I Love It Loud. That's not a fast song. They could have gone a different way, though. They could have gone power pop. Look at the other bands that were making it huge. Journey sold 5 times platinum with Frontiers. I can easily imagine Kiss singing Separate Ways or Open Arms. I can imagine Paul singing Open Arms. I can imagine Kiss doing any of those big Journey radio hits. Bryan Adams, who co-wrote songs on Creatures of the Night, he sold 6 times platinum with Reckless. I can imagine Kiss doing songs off of Reckless. Run to You off of Reckless. I can imagine Kiss doing Run to You. I absolutely can imagine them going down that path. Think of what might have happened if they had gone more mainstream rock in the 80s instead of heavy metal. I don't know, it's just a thought exercise. But they didn't. They went heavy metal. This was their Led Zeppelin album. I know people are going to hate me for saying that, but I believe it. I'm sticking with it. It's mid-tempo. It's heavy. It's blues-based. And it's good. I don't think it's quite the killer that many, many, many people think it is, which is why, I know a lot of people that put it as like, oh, it's the greatest thing ever. I don't think it is, but I do enjoy it a lot. I will not, though, ever understand why people think I Love It Loud is the best song on this album. I'm like, what? Why in the world do you think that? To me, War Machine is the best song on this album. And it just kills me that Bryan Adams, the man who wrote Run to You, co-wrote War Machine. That is so fascinating to me that it's the same dude, because those songs are so bizarrely different. But that is an awesome song. And that's my favorite song on the album. So anyway, that is my my number 4, Creatures of the Night.
Well said. Interesting you say heavy metal. Do you think it's on the borderline between hard rock and heavy metal? Because I think of heavy metal in that era as Iron Maiden, Gallopy, a lot of the chugga chugga guitars. I mean, Judas Priest.
That's the European version of heavy metal. If you go with like I said, in America, though, by 1982, 83, metal was very much Rat, Dokken, Motley Crue. All of that stuff was folded into the metal umbrella, and Kiss absolutely fell into that category.
Yeah, okay. All right. Well, I'm going to go to another album that came out in 1976. So remember the 70s where bands used to put 3 albums or 2 albums a year? Uriah Heep, Purple, Kiss were the same. So in 1976, they put out Destroyer, which polarized a few of their fans with the bells and whistles and the Bob Ezrin. So later that year, they put out Rock and Roll Over, which was very much back to basics Kiss, the rock, meat and potatoes, no embellishments whatsoever. You bring in Eddie Kramer as the producer. So I love this album. I think this is top shelf Kiss, and they are just a band united, and the songwriting on this album is just really spec. I Want You, that's a cracker of an opening track. Baby Driver, Peter Criss. I'm a big fan of Peter Criss as a singer. I know you are, Reed. I love that Rod Stewart, that sort of raspy, throaty tonality. And, he gets to, not only has Baby Driver, but he has Hard Luck Woman, which was a very strong follow-up to Beth. I think that hit the top 20. But, you hear that song, you think, gee, I think I could imagine Rod Stewart, all the Faces, singing that song. Love 'Em and Leave 'Em. It's got a bit of a groove to it. Mr. Speed. Yeah, look, there's some dumb lyrics. You kind of forgive it, but there's no log in the fireplace, folks. So it's at a higher level of smut. Ladies' Room, Take Me. I love it. And it's got one of the coolest Kiss album covers. Hey, Reed, I'm going to put you on the spot. What's your favorite Kiss album cover?
My favorite album cover is Rock and Roll Over.
Yeah, it's
No
mine
question.
too. Got a T-shirt?
Of Rock and Roll Over? No.
Yeah. No?
I wish, but no.
Yeah. Anyway, that's my pick. Rock and Roll Over from 1976. Love it.
Cool. Okay, we're getting down to it. We're in the top 3.
We are.
Okay, so for my top 3, I am staying in the 80s. I am going back to Lick It Up. So one of the things that I absolutely love about this album, and I'm going to agree with pretty much everything you said about this album, it's really too bad that Vinnie Vincent could not get it together. And I've heard a lot of what Vinnie has to say in interviews, not everything, because frankly, I really don't care. But I've heard him give a lot of interviews and the problems he had, and they weren't offering him enough money and blah, blah, blah. Well, you know what? That's too bad. I mean, I do sympathize. He thinks he was worth more money. That's a decision that he had to make. But the fact is, it was not his band, man. So it was incumbent upon him to get along with Gene and Paul, and he could not make that work. So he's out of the band, which is too bad because Lick It Up is the last album that they do where every song is written by a band member. Peter, can you pause us for a second there? He would use, or Paul Stanley would use all kinds of writing partners for every album that followed this, but it's just these 4 guys on Lick It Up. Even though they have Rick Derringer do a guest solo on Exciter, which is a great solo. And frankly, I think it's one of my favorite things Rick Derringer ever played on. He comes and plays at the Dallas Guitar Show a lot, so I've got to see Rick Derringer play in person many times. Not Vinnie Vincent. Vinnie Vincent has not been at the Dallas Guitar Show. This is another album that I first experienced through MTV, and I can never remember whether it's the video for All Hell's Breaking Loose or Lick It Up, but I distinctly remember sitting in front of the TV, and they had that cheap post-apocalypse and Gene and Paul walking down the street, and I instantly went, "Oh my gosh, that's Kiss!" I mean, I knew like that. I went, "Oh my, yep, that's Kiss. They've taken their makeup off. I need to find out what's going on." And it turned out a friend of mine had the cassette, and I borrowed it. He was like, "I hate this album," and I borrowed it from him, and I went, "I love it." So he sold it to me for a couple of bucks, and I was instantly back on the Kiss bandwagon. I think it has some amazing music. I mean, it has some stupid songs like Dance All Over Your Face. But even with the stupid lyrics, that's actually got a really good riff. Vinny he plays some great guitar on this album. It's got some great solos. There are some fantastic riffs on this. I said the tempos on this pick up. It is not just all slow mid-tempo stuff like Creatures in the Night. It picks way up. It's much brighter. Creatures in the Night's a very dour sounding album. Everything's mixed. There's too much bass in it, not enough treble. This is a much brighter sounding album. I think it's easier to listen to, and it was the perfect album at the perfect time. And again, and believe me, it's not nostalgia, because I was not a happy person when this album came out. I was in high school, and high school, like for a lot of us, high school was not my favorite time of life. But I sure loved listening to this music, and it still makes me happy. So that's my number 3.
Yeah. Do you think this was the album that they had to make to resurrect Kiss? Did they have to take the makeup? Do you think that they would have survived deep into the 80s with the makeup thing?
No. No, I mean there was no secondary market for that. There's no casino circuit to go on. There's no state fair. Well, I mean there was a state fair circuit, but that's
Mm.
why I give them all the credit. Like I said, there was no Run DMC doing Kiss covers. You know, they didn't need somebody else to resurrect their career. Yeah, they took the makeup off, so that gave them a gimmick. But all they did was they put out a killer album with some good songs, and they took their makeup off and they bootstrapped themselves back up into popularity. So, frankly, I will always give them credit for that over Aerosmith because they did not need an outside force.
Yeah. Put the album cover up again. I just want to show you. This is an indication how Vinny was not a team player. Everyone's wearing black and he's wearing pink.
Yeah.
So you could tell straight from the get-go that maybe he's an individual. And individuals don't last long in the Kiss story, do they?
Yeah, yeah. Clearly was not long for that band, which is again that was his loss.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So we're going to the business end of the top three. And my next pick is one which was an entry point for me in Australia. And it's 1979's Dynasty, or Dynasty, as we say down under. I love this album. Um, I'll A good song is a good song. I Was Made for Loving You. That was a #1 hit in Australia. I love it. So I think the story goes that Gene and Paul were getting into the razzmatazz. They had glamorous girlfriends. I know Gene. I don't know. I get confused. Was he going out with Diana Ross?
Donna Summer.
Did he go out with Donna Summer? I thought it was Diana Ross or Cher. Anyway, one of those three. And he was partying at 54, and I think Stanley was with him, and Stanley was listening to a lot of the music. So you can imagine Nile Rodgers, Chic, Sister Sledge, all very bass heavy, all that rhythm. And he said, look, I could write a song like that. And my understanding of the songwriting process for this song, it was done very quickly. It's a great song. And, you know, you read these interviews with Gene Simmons later in the piece, and he kind of gets all shy and embarrassed, but they still play it, and it still gets the biggest audience reaction. I've watched a lot of concerts on YouTube overseas. This song gets a lot of reaction. I think on Spotify you were saying, Reed, this is probably the second biggest Kiss song by
It
views.
is.
So
it's this one. What's the next one? Forever's #3. Yeah, Beth is still the biggest.
yeah, it's a good song. A good song is a good song. So look, they bring in a lot of outside writers: Vinnie Poncia, Desmond Child, Howard Marks. This is where the rot's really setting in, where they're getting in outside players. I was absolutely horrified to read later because you see the Fab Four on the front of the cover. You think, hey, they're all playing, and to learn that Peter Criss only played on one track. So it was very much a band of individuals, as you said. The only thing I disagree with what you said earlier, I don't think everyone was fully committed. Peter Criss, reading his book, wanted to get out of the band so badly. I think he just absolutely had enough. He was going rogue. When you saw Kiss, you obviously didn't see, Peter Criss do the infamous slow down drumming where he was protesting. Did it seem like that was a band united? I know you were very young in the day.
I do not remember there being any bad vibes at all.
Yeah,
but I was just happy to be there. Certainly.
Oh,
I was
absolutely.
11, but
Absolutely. But I love the songs on this album. 2000 Man, yeah, I prefer it to the Stones. I think it's a great song. Sure Know Something is one of the most heartfelt, emotional Paul Stanley songs. It's direct. When he's got his mind to it, I think he is a mighty fine songwriter, you know. There's no smut. It's just emotional. It's direct. And I've always said this is one of probably, in my opinion, one of Kiss's top 5 songs of all time. Dirty Living, love it. If I was, walking down 42nd Street and I had headphones on, this is the song that I could imagine would be a soundtrack. It's just, you can hear the grime on the streets, and Peter Criss is just riffing. I mean, he only does one song, but it's a bloody good song. And I love that fat Gene Simmons bass. You know, he's a really good bass player.
Underrated, yes.
Absolutely. Charisma. You're still seeing on side two, Charisma, Magic Touch, Hard Times. There is a bit of a template for Unmasked. It's getting a little bit power pop. Save Your Love, X-Ray Eyes. I love it. But a lot of people hate it. So you've got to imagine, folks, this is my entry point to Kiss. And then I discovered the catalogue, you know, went back in time, and then I followed the journey. So it's my number 3. I defend it. I know a lot of Kiss folk that were brought up on Dress to Kill, you know, Rock and Roll Over and the first album, hate it, but I like it. All right, number 2.
Okay. Oh, I forgot to mention my favorite song on Lick It Up is the opener, Exciter. That was one of those songs that just grabbed me from the very start. I went, oh, I'm going to love this album. It's a great song. Now, my number 2, this is an album I have to admit, it surprised me as I was going through these albums that it just kept going up and up and up and up. And I was like, really? This is really going to be my number 2, but it just stayed with it. And much to my shock, my number 2 album is going to be Rock and Roll Over. My favorite album of the Alive 2 cycle. It's, again, just got the fantastic rock and roll songs. My problem with Destroyer is all of the things that Peter loves about it. And again, it's the comparison to Alive 2 that it suffers for me, because I listen to Alive 2 so much. And then all of that overproduction stuff, I'm like, I like those punchy live versions, right? With all of that stuff stripped off. So then when I go back and listen to the album versions, I'm like, there's too much studio stuff on there. All of that stuff is missing from Rock and Roll Over. And I love the deep album cuts. I love Baby Driver. That is a great song. I love it. All right. I could spend an hour talking about why I hate Beth. I think it's the worst song that something pseudo-Kiss ever recorded, because there's only one member of Kiss on that recording. You know, there's no member of Kiss playing an instrument on there. It's just Peter Criss singing. No member of Kiss wrote that. Peter didn't write that. I know his name is on the credits, but Peter's previous band wrote that. It's not a love song. Everybody pretends it's a love song. It's not a love song. They just, it sounds so sweet, because it sounded like all of the other syrupy crap on AM radio at the time. Hard Luck Woman, to me, is an improvement in every conceivable way. It's got guitars. It was written by the band. It's performed by the band. Peter's voice still sucks. Peter is not a balladeer. Peter sounds great on stuff like Hooligan and Baby Driver, Black Diamond, that stuff where he's got that really rough, growly rock and roll voice. Perfect. Sweet ballady stuff, you know, I didn't notice in the 70s when I was a kid, but now listening to high def, the man cannot hold a note. Yeah.
Well, at least he can hold a CD.
Yes. Too true. It's the drugs, people. I'm telling you, it's the drugs. Also, let me just say, Mr. Speed is my favorite deep album cut off of any Kiss album. That little lick, that is freaking fantastic. And I have never heard anyone ever talk about that song. Paul never talks about it. Gene never talks about it. Ace never talks about it. The only person I've ever heard talk about that is John Five, the current guitarist for Motley Crue. I once saw him do an interview where the entire time he just sat there playing licks from Kiss albums while he was talking. And he played the lick from Mr. Speed. And I was like, he's playing the lick from Mr. Speed. I didn't know anybody else knew that song existed. I love that song. It's my number 2 album. It makes me happy. It's a fantastic album, and it does have the coolest cover Kiss ever put on an album.
We agree on that. But Beth, Reed can't hear you calling. Sorry to say. All right. So Creatures of the Night is my number 2. What an absolute banger of an album. Produced by Michael James Jackson, Paul Stanley, Gene Simmons. This is an absolute cracker. Heavy metal, hard rock, I don't care. It has the best sounding drums of any single Kiss album. Eric Carr, when he laid down the drum tracks, wanted to go for the big John Bonham sound. And I've read stories of how they actually got that sound. It was very intricate. They recorded this at the record plant in Los Angeles, and it involved an elevator shaft and a microphone, and isolating the drum in a particular room and getting that sort of echo down an elevator shaft. Read the story online. It's fascinating. But the drum sound is absolutely monstrous, and it's prevalent all the way through this album. So when it starts off with Creatures of the Night, how you very well articulated it, Reed, you know, wow, Kiss are really back. Saint and Sinner, Rock and Roll Hell, Danger, I Love It Loud, War Machine. That is probably top 5 Kiss for me. I think it fits Gene Simmons to a T, and for it to be co-written by Bryan Adams and Jim Valanche is a head scratch. So actually, Bryan Adams in a recent interview, Reed, was they sort of brought up about War Machine, and he seemed really vague about it. It was sort of like he wrote this song like a 1,000 galaxies ago, and he's kind of forgot about it. Found that really, really odd. Seems slightly embarrassed too. I Love It Loud. I Still Love You. One of the deep emotional sort of lyrics, and the performance of Paul. Paul's voice. Would you agree, Reed, this may be a high point vocally? If you were going to do a graph and just say, what is the high point for Paul Stanley vocally, I'd say around the time of this album, I don't think he's been much better. Maybe it's
I think he improves as he goes through the 80s. So,
well, he's definitely on the upward, but yeah, to my way of thinking, I think his vocal performance in this album is just right at the peak of the mountain. Commercially, it flopped. The tour didn't do so well. There's stories that they were playing venues around the States, and it was sort of the curtain was right up to the half. And Joe B., who I do a lot of shows with, has this wonderful story where he said he's never been to a concert where there were less people. It was like at 30% capacity, and it was embarrassing. So outstanding album, but it just didn't correspond with sales. And I think it may have been the makeup thing. It may have been the image on the album. It still had the Fabulous Four, albeit you've got Eric Carr on the cover, but people had moved on, so they had to take it off to survive. But as an album, artistically, it's right up there. It is a fantastic album, and that is my number 2. All right, Reed, drum roll, the number 1. Is it going to be The Elder? Is it going to be, I don't know. I'm in suspense. Tell me, what is it?
As I was watching the Paul Stanley and Gene Simmons promo for the Kiss avatars, Paul was talking about how, when we started in 1973, the life expectancy of a band was 5 years. And we thought, if we get 5 years out of this, we'll have done pretty well. And I thought, that's really about right. And my own theory is that you get 4 to 6 years. not coincidentally, in the American school system, the amount of time that people are in junior high and high school. That's really when you listen to music. And by the time you're in college, you're probably just going to continue listening to the type of music that you were listening to when you were in high school, or you're not going to listen to much music anymore at all. Your tastes are more or less set if you bother listening to music at all from that point. Because by then the new crop of kids is in school and they need a new thing. So Kiss had now been around long enough to go through two phases. That's the thing, right? They've gone through the makeup thing. It had run its course. They've taken off the makeup. It had already run its course and it had been tumultuous, right? They've gone through three guitarists. They've kicked they've kicked Mark St. John out of the band. They got in Bruce Kulick. Nobody knows what they're going to produce. Well, they produce the single best slice of truly glam metal ever, and that is Asylum, my all-time favorite Kiss album, the album that makes me absolutely happiest. My only knock against this album is I think it sounds cheap, which is funny. Coming from 2023, it's easy to not know just how much media exposure Kiss had from Animalize. It wasn't just the CD. Well, at the time, the cassette, the album, the 8-track, they were on MTV. MTV broadcast a concert. They had a concert VHS. They had a promo VHS tape. They were doing guest appearances in all sorts of things. I mean, they were everywhere. There was just market saturation for Kiss on Animalize. Animalize was their most successful album, which is so weird because this is their least successful album from the 80s. It sold less than Crazy Nights. It sold less than Animalize. It sold less than Lick It Up. It sold
more than the Elder, though.
Oh, well, sorry. When I have this thing, when I talk about the 80s, I mean Creatures of the Night, Lick It Up, Animalize, Asylum, Crazy Nights. It sold the same as Creatures of the Night, basically. But it sold way less than Animalize. Because, again, people moved on to the next thing. Kiss had already played out their second phase of their career. They were yesterday's news. So weird. But to me, the songs on this album were so good, but Animalize was heavy metal. It was so aggressive. It was so heavy comparatively. This is very pop. It's not aggressive. It's very melodic. It's very the only real difference between this and Crazy Nights tonally is that they added keyboards to Crazy Nights, which everybody says Crazy Nights is their heart album, right? And because they used Bruce Fairbairn to produce Crazy Nights.
Yeah.
But the songwriting is very similar. But you know what? The performances are outstanding. Paul sounds amazing. Gene sounds amazing. Bruce Kulick. Listen to the solos on this album. There was no mega shredder in the 80s playing better than Bruce. He wasn't like Eddie Van Halen tapping out Eruption, although he has some terrifiers, as they say. So these really, fast passages. They're beautiful melodic passages, but they're also really fast, and you can listen to them, and they're all wheedly, shreddy stuff. Just wonderful stuff attached to great songs. Now, we did a panel on Asylum earlier on Rock Daydream Nation, and I mistakenly said that Who Wants to Be Lonely is my favorite track. And because I had said that so aggressively, I just went ahead and kept with that for the rest of the show. It's actually Tears Are Falling is my favorite. So that's my favorite song, Tears Are Falling. I do like Who Wants to Be Lonely. I like King in the Mountain. Once again, Kiss always starts their albums with a really great song. That is something that they had a really good knack for, was picking a good album opener.
Yeah.
And King of the Mountain's a great album opener. I said if they could just, I don't know how, use AI something. If they could take this album and apply the sonics of Revenge, don't touch anything else on it. Just take the sonics of Revenge and apply it to this album. It would probably be my all-time favorite album by any band. It's just, it's amazing. It makes me so happy. If I'm in a bad mood, I can put this album on and it just lifts everything. I love it that much. It's my #1 Kiss album. It's one of my all-time favorite albums. Asylum.
Do yourself a favor. It's in my top 10 too. Well done. And your passion really comes out, Reed. I appreciate that. All right. My #1 is the Kiss self-titled debut from 1974. The reason why I've chosen this, production aside, it suffers the similar problems than Hotter Than Hell, because it sounds like it was recorded off a portable cassette player, is that this is where the legend is born. So all the songs, the best songs that Kiss have ever wrote were on this album. Strutter, Cold Gin, Nothing to Lose, Juice, Black Diamond. I love it. It's kind of bluesy. It's got that Stones feel. Look, Kiss are trying to figure out their sound. It's kind of, maybe you could almost argue it's a little bit primitive sounding, but I just think if you strip it back and look at the songwriting, I don't think Kiss have ever been better. It's simple, it's meat and potatoes, but it's so effective. And I just can't go past that. This is where the legend was born, where you had 4 hungry young men in New York. How they came together is, the stuff of legend. Some of them are kind of like, you had 2 that were sort of friends and the other 2 that were basically strangers, combining and willing themselves to be successful. And I don't think there's any other album where they really want and they are willing to succeed comes out in their songwriting like this album. And sometimes the best albums, Read, are the debuts, because they're just, people are hungry and they're just putting everything they can to succeed. And this is what comes out in this album. Look, there are some flaws on it. It's not perfect. There's a couple of filler tracks that I could live without, like Kissing Time. I'm, not a big fan of that. And I think that is always high up in the polls as one of the worst Kiss songs of all time. But, it's my #1. And it's one that I, fairly on in my journey with Kiss, that I familiarised myself with. And, it is what it is. So, Kiss debut.
All right.
Well, there we have it. So I think we've pretty well shared a similar pool of albums, a couple of variations here and there, but I think we've got a fairly common crossover of top 10. Don't you agree, Reed?
Yep, a lot of similarities. I couldn't quite squeak in Unmasked. It probably is. It'd be in my top 15. And I quite like Monster, their last album. Not enough to make my top 10, certainly, but it's listenable for me.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, there you go. That's the top 10. We've done it. We've achieved it. So, Kiss, the new frontier. Let's see where they go with this whole Avatar business. That's a whole new story and a whole new episode. Well, there you go. The thumbs down already. Please like and subscribe to Rock Daydream Nation. Click the bell. Please tell us what your favourite Kiss album is. Give us your top 5. What's your favourite Kiss song? What's your favourite Kiss album cover? But one thing's for sure, Reed and I will be doing a lot more stuff in 2024 on Rock Daydream Nation, and I'm sure that the topic of Kiss will come up in some shape or form. So, Reed, Happy New Year. Merry Christmas.
Happy New Year, Peter. Merry
And
Christmas.
Merry Christmas, and I'll see you in the new year. See ya.
Cheers.